Hey, I am talking with Samantha Williams today about a very nifty synthesis template that she has designed in Excel for her English 300 students to help them synthesize. And I will let Samantha take over.
Sure. Um, so teaching synthesis I found was difficult because it's something so unfamiliar to students who are accustomed to, the same sort of handful of writing assignments that they've been doing since like elementary school. It tends to be, the same sort of familiar stuff, personal narratives, 5 paragraph essays, and there's something about an explanatory synthesis that feels extremely strange. And I do get that because it's doing something different. It's doing something that they're not really accustomed to doing. And they come at it thinking it needs to fit into a category that they're familiar with. So they'll say, I've never written one of these before. And it gets confused for other things. It starts to feel like maybe it's a sort of maybe it's a research paper. They get the sense that it's not argumentative. They understand that, but if it's not an argumentative paper, then doesn't that mean that it's just a report? That it's just it's meant to go find information and report on it. And so I've tried several things trying to clarify what it is I'm looking for. I've made sure to emphasize synthesis of viewpoints because especially with the high achieving students, they feel very confident in that they know what they're doing and they'll give me something that is more of a report. And so I'll emphasize, no, it needs to be a synthesis of viewpoints, of perspective. And of course, that gets greeted with confused faces too. So when it comes time to actually synthesize these things, we're having trouble figuring out what that means. My thinking was if I could somehow put this in sort of a visual presentation that would show where things belonged, then it might make sense before we get to turning it into a paper. I used a synthesis grid as an example, and it did seem to help. We were able to clarify, for instance, one of the first mistakes they tended to make with a synthesis grid was having a good column and a bad column, a yes column and a no column. But then from there we can work on, okay, it actually needs to be a little bit more complex than that because there's not enough to synthesize there. So it did help, but it wasn't quite, there was a gap between the synthesis grid and the paper, trying to figure out what they had done with the grid, with organizing the information, with then turning that into a paper. So that's when I took the grid, the template that I had already made in Google Sheets, and added a new sheet. And I created a paper outline. Typically, I hesitate with outlines and templates because I don't always love the implication that there's like one right way to do it. So I sometimes hesitate, but I kind of came up with an outline, introduction, conclusion, everything in between, and I used the functions in Google Sheets so that in one sheet, one cell that's populated will then, or that's written, that's filled in, will then populate in a cell in the different sheet. So that what they input in the synthesis grid would then show up in the appropriate place in the outline guide in the other sheet.
Brilliant!
It sounds so much more complicated than it is. And I think from the student standpoint, it can look a little bit scary. I think that I'm trying to make sure that it's very clear what to do. So I have instructions in each cell for the synthesis grid, instructions on what should go there. It looks like a lot of writing, but once they answer those questions, all they have to do is switch to the outline guide sheet and everything that they wrote is where it should be in the outline.
Yeah, that is. And so how has it worked?
It helped with, I haven't used it for the full class yet. I've used it with a few students who were able to, who were having some difficulties when they came back after kind of working on it a little bit. I showed them what I had added, and it helped to clarify what it was they were trying to accomplish, what the actual end goal was. Because an explanatory synthesis can look so different from example to example that they're not sure if theirs is in the right arena, because it's hard to draw like a conclusion on whether they've done the right thing based on a variety of examples, if that makes sense.
And have you seen the finished product of the paper for these students who have tried this and how did that go?
It helps a whole lot to help them figure out what to do with the information that they come up with for their synthesis grid. So once they come to this conclusion of, okay, so here's what these things have in common. These various sources are all talking about this particular theme, and here's what they all have in common. How do I explain that? And they were able to kind of do that a little bit better, because it's easier to write a paragraph when you know what your point is. So when you're trying to explain the conclusion that you've reached, when you're trying to explain your findings, if you don't really understand what's really connecting those things and how it's supposed to fit together, it's hard to make a cohesive piece. You just have the sort of isolated paragraphs that, even if they're synthesized, they don't make sense together. And so that's what made it come together into a paper that made sense.
I'm thinking about the same problem that my students in 300 have, getting all of the things they have pulled together in their annotated bibliography into some kind of argument in their paper. And I'm thinking that a version of this could be a good intermediary to help them get those related concepts together, or those different themes. And I kind of walk them through something that is not at all a template, but I'm look back at your bibliography and look at the ideas that you had about this point in those different sources. Look what you said you would use that for in the, how I'm going to use this source thing.
Yeah.
And pull the like things together. And some of them do that and do that well, but they could kind of help give them some structure to do that, and then dovetail it right into a tentative outline to start out could be a really helpful thing to get them over that hurdle of, oh my gosh, I've done all this bibliography. Now how do I start on my paper?
Yeah, I think that also because, especially by English 300, students are pretty accustomed to, you sit down, you start at the beginning, you write a paper, you turn it in. They've managed to come up with ways to avoid outlining and planning ahead, because in their mind, from the way they see it, it's extra work. To do an outline it's not part of the work, it's an additional step. To them, it's something that wastes time before they can get to the actual homework that they just need to get done. And something like this, I think, might be useful for that too, because especially with a synthesis paper, they're trying to do something that they're not familiar with, and it makes it really, really hard to skip that step, because they're familiar with, okay, first I start with an introduction, the thesis should have all of my topic points, and then I'll go through those one by one. They have a strategy that can work well enough for a lot of students to just write a paper without planning ahead. But I think this can also sort of emphasize the benefit of planning ahead. You see, once you fill in all of these questions, you flip over to the outline guide and then see the paper is there. It's just looking back at you. You've written the paper. All you have to do is put it into paragraphs and sentences. And so it sort of makes it evident that it is part of the process, not an extra thing that I'm asking students to do.
Yeah. Very, very, very useful. And you're sharing this link with us to the to your Google Excel template.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are plenty of changes, adjustments, that you can make with it to make it your own.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Samantha.
No problem, anytime.